Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Browns of California, the family dynasty that transformed a state and shaped a nation, by Miriam Pawel, narrated by Christina Delaine. Preface. The genesis of this book was a conversation several years ago on an isolated ranch in Northern California with Jerry Brown. The governor had talked in recent speeches about this land, settled by his great-grandfather soon after the gold rush, and still in the family 4 generations later. I was curious to see the homestead and understand what had drawn the last heir of California's storied political dynasty to spend his weekends in a small cabin with no running water, off the grid. Amid the rolling hills dotted with oaks, Jerry Brown talked about re-inhabitation. He explained his desire to return to his ancestral home, his quest to research every aspect of the land, and his effort to trace his family roots. It is a history worth studying, he said, because history offers anchors in times of disruption and helps us understand how to respond to change. The same could be said, of course, about the history of California. I came away from that conversation struck by the parallel arcs of the Browns and California. Jerry Brown traced a family history that spanned the life of the state he and his father had governed. I thought the story of 4 generations might offer a lens through which to tell a unique history of the 31st state. It is, by definition, a selective history, shaped by the paths of the extended family. It is more Northern California than Southern, more modern than early, more political than cultural. Yet, because the family is so intertwined with California, the Brown story illuminates core values, concepts, places, and events that have molded the world's 5th largest economy. There is arguably no family more passionate about California, more closely identified with the Golden State, or more influential in determining its fate. The heart of this book is the story of 2 men who collectively governed California for almost a quarter century, an ebullient, beloved old-style politician and his cerebral, skeptical, visionary son. The book is first and foremost a family saga, a narrative history built around collective lives and actions, from far-reaching policy decisions to private, personal choices. My goal is to convey through that tapestry a sense of the sweep and spirit of California, to highlight that which has stayed the same over time and that which has changed. I leave it to future historians to pass judgment on the Brown legacy, which will become clearer with distance. Given that the 2 principal protagonists have the same name, and many other characters share the same surname, I refer to the various Browns by their first names. I did this for clarity and readability. It is also true that for many Californians, the state's 2 longest-serving Democratic governors are known simply as Pat and Jerry. The Mansion. The corner of 16th and H was just a vacant lot when August Schuckman reached Sacramento in 1852, a square of frontier dirt awaiting its destiny. August drove a stagecoach, peddled fruit, and dreamed big. The German immigrant had come west seeking land, not gold. Within a decade, he staked his claim to a ranch 60 miles north of the state capital in Colusa County. August's daughter Ida was born there in 1878, the same year a prosperous Sacramento merchant moved into a majestic Victorian mansion he had built at 16th and H. The empty lot had become the most elegant house in town, 7 fireplaces of Italian marble, elaborate bronze hinges and doorknobs engraved with hummingbirds, intricate wood inlay on the ballroom floor. By the turn of the century, more than 1 million people had been lured to California by visions of gold, land, and sun. Sacramento needed a residence suitable for its governors. In 1903, the state bought the wedding cake house at 16th and H for $32,500. 2 years later, August's daughter Ida gave birth to her first son, Edmund Gerald Brown. He would grow up to be the 12th governor to live in the mansion. 16th and H would become the coordinates where the history of the Golden State intersected with the destiny of August Schuckman's descendants. A family shaped by California would grow into a dynasty that transformed the state, with ambition and audacity to match the grandeur of the towering, turreted mansion. Edmund Brown, known to all but his mother as Pat, loved his life in the mansion, where he seamlessly blended work and family. Most days began with meetings in the breakfast room. That's where Senator John Kennedy asked Pat for support in 1959, and where Pat took a congratulatory call from President Kennedy 3 years later after defeating Richard Nixon in the governor's race. Most nights, Pat stayed up late reading files from his overstuffed briefcase in the mustard-colored easy chair in the living room, or the upstairs office with the special panic button hidden in a drawer. Weekends brought grandchildren splashing in the kidney-shaped pool and sliding down the curved mahogany banister. Pat's sister might arrive with Ida to find Frank Sinatra at dinner. Adlai Stevenson stayed overnight, and Earl Warren often stopped by his old home. Each Thanksgiving and Christmas, 4 generations of Browns gathered in the mansion. News photographers snapped photos of Pat with the turkey, fresh out of the oven. At Christmas time, the Browns chartered a bus to bring San Francisco friends to the mansion, decorated with lights on the turrets and towers, with 14-foot Christmas trees in the parlor and hall, and smaller trees in almost every room. First Lady Bernice Brown oversaw the formal entertainment, dozens of dinners for legislators and lobbyists that eased partisan divides and smoothed important deals. Visitors knew to check for the small black ceramic cat on the table in the entryway. As long as the sleeping cat was on display, conversations were off the record. Only the Browns' youngest child grew up in the mansion. As a teenager, Kathy painted red nail polish on the toes of the clawfoot tub, held slumber parties in the old ballroom, and sought privacy by using the telephone hidden in the music room closet. One Halloween, she climbed the 2 flights of walnut spiral stairs to the gaslit cupola and dropped water balloons out the porthole window on trick-or-treaters 6 stories below. Her older brother, Jerry, lived in the mansion only briefly, just long enough for the house to hold sway. Jerry first visited the day his father took office in 1959, a young Jesuit seminarian in cassock and collar posing stiffly next to Grandma Ida at a celebratory dinner. Within a year, he was in college, then law school. In 1965, Jerry studied for the bar in his father's office on the 3rd floor of the mansion. He found the lessons tiresome. Wandering out onto the stair landing one day, he heard his father in heated conversation with the assembly speaker over which man would run for governor the following year. The debate was as exciting as the studies were tedious. At that moment, Jerry decided that he would be governor too. When Pat Brown was voted out of office, the mansion became another California boom and bust tale. Governor Ronald Reagan moved to a classic estate in the fabulous 40s neighborhood, shunning the house his wife called a fire trap. The mansion, eulogized by Sacramento native Joan Didion as an extremely individual house, perhaps her favorite in the world, became a museum. Visitors toured rooms full of relics a dozen families had left behind. The 1902 Steinway piano from George Pardee, the first governor to live in the mansion. The plum velvet sofa and matching chairs selected by Mrs. Hiram Johnson. Hand-knotted Persian carpets from the Warren era. Bernice Brown's self-cleaning oven. In the upstairs bedroom, her inaugural gown. In 1975, a decade after his epiphany on the mansion stairs, Edmund G. Brown, Jr. became the youngest California governor in modern times. He preached small is beautiful and spurned the 16-room suburban residence that Reagan had commissioned, opting for a Spartan apartment near the Capitol. He soon became the state's most popular governor and just as quickly among those held in lowest esteem. In the land of reinvention, both the man and the mansion would have a triumphant second act. In 2010, decades after he had left Sacramento, written off as a political has-been, Jerry Brown was elected governor once again. One of the first things he did was bring his wife to see the house at 16th and H. The state finally began a renovation. Craftsmen restored the original Victorian details while they discreetly added modern plumbing, appliances, and solar panels. Jerry invited relatives to lunch at the mansion to celebrate his 76th birthday. On November 4, 2014, he hosted a dinner for staff on the evening he was elected to a historic fourth term. He claimed victory on the mansion steps. 1 year later, the Browns moved in, just in time to celebrate Christmas. The family gathered once more in the elegant house at 16th and H. They posed for pictures. A news photographer watched the governor inspect the turkey. The children who had learned to swim in the kidney-shaped pool showed their children the secret places in the special house. A photo of August Schuckman sat on the fireplace mantel in the old music room. Jerry called his new home a spiritual place. On a fall afternoon, he recalled the moment he had decided he would be governor. He gestured toward the bottom of the grand staircase a few feet away. "Every day I come down the stairs, my whole life is unfolding." 1. The Pioneer. Long before the discovery of gold conferred upon the state its universal, enduring epithet, the land imbued California with its seductive, lyrical promise. Its name was bestowed by early Spaniards in homage to a popular 16th-century romance novel about an island paradise ruled by Queen Calafia. In the centuries that followed, explorers discovered the wonders of Yosemite, the fertile valleys, natural ports, blooming deserts, and breathtaking coastline. Then came the gold rush, catapulting California forward with the warp speed that would become one of the state's defining characteristics. In the spring of 1848, the population of San Francisco was 575 men, 177 women, and 60 children. Within a year, the city had close to 25,000 inhabitants. Doctors and lawyers abandoned practices. Tradesmen, laborers, and professionals from around the world arrived in California by boat and stagecoach. In the early days, the mines yielded as much as $50,000 a day in gold, more than $1.5 million in 2016 dollars, money that fueled the region's explosive growth. First, the pioneers sought fortunes in gold. Then they created the infrastructure and provided the services demanded by this brave new world. An American frontier that had been gradually inching westward suddenly leapfrogged across the country. Californians improvised, unburdened by tradition, open to experimentation. They devised routines, invented machines, and established lifestyles that suited their needs. They could not wait for supplies and knowledge to migrate from the East. They had neither time nor inclination to adopt the staid wisdom or customs of the Eastern establishment. California was a land now engrossing the attention of the civilized world with its future importance. Polish immigrant Felix Wierzbicki wrote in California as It Is and As It May Be, the first book published in English in California. The 1849 guidebook foresaw transcontinental railroads, millions of residents, trade with China, and a booming agricultural economy. It is not necessary to be gifted with an extraordinary foresight to predict that as soon as the industry and enterprise of the Americans take a fair footing on this soil, the commerce of the country will grow daily. The carpenter John Marshall had first spotted gold in early 1848, just as officials were signing the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War and ceded California to the United States. When the gold rush began, California had only a makeshift government. Suddenly, the need for laws became urgent. Congress proposed that California skip territorial status and move directly to statehood, but lawmakers deadlocked for months over whether to allow slavery, a decision that could upset the fragile compromise that had been crafted to hold the Union together. In a pattern destined to be repeated, Californians took matters into their own hands. They called a convention and adopted a constitution that banned slavery, on pragmatic rather than moral grounds. Delegates argued that the nature of work in California was unsuitable for slavery. Left unsaid was the fear that large slaveholders could have posed unwelcome competition. The Free State of California joined the Union on September 9, 1850, which would become an official holiday, Admission Day. The story of those early years, wrote California's first great philosopher, Josiah Royce, was the story of how a new and great community first came to a true consciousness of itself. Writers like Royce witnessed that evolution and penned words that shaped lasting visions of California, a land of immigrants, a place of reinvention, a spirit of openness, an incubator of innovation. That was the world that drew a young German named Simon August Schuckman. The boy known as August was the second son of Friedrich Kieksmüller Schuckman and his wife Caroline Wilhelmine Louisa. Because the Schuckmans had property but no male heirs, Friedrich's father had taken his bride's surname, Schuckman, when they married. Friedrich and Caroline had 8 children. 5 boys and 1 girl lived into adulthood. Born July 10, 1827, August grew up in Wüsten, a tiny town in the Principality of Lippe-Detmold, in the middle of what was then Prussia. His father operated an inn. August's older brother stood to inherit the family business, leaving the younger son an uncertain future. As revolution spread across Europe in 1848, August, believing he would soon be drafted, made his way north to Hamburg and used savings to book passage to a new life. 2 months shy of his 22nd birthday, August Schuckman arrived in New York on May 8, 1849, on the ship the Perseverance. He was among almost 1 million Germans who emigrated to the United States in the decade that followed, driven by political and economic upheaval. By 1855, German immigrants were outnumbered only by those from Great Britain. Many had read about California, both at home and once they arrived in the new land. They had heard about the exploits of John Sutter, a Swiss-German, née Johann August Sutter, who founded, with his son, the city that became Sacramento. Gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill. The Emigrant's Guide to California, published in St. Louis in 1849, was quickly translated into German, the first of numerous guidebooks that outlined ways to reach the new frontier. Travel around the Horn could take 9 months and cost $600. Cutting across Panama saved time, but entailed a dangerous, disease-ridden land crossing. The overland route from Missouri cost as little as $55, the most popular option. By the time August Schuckman headed for California, the perilous trip had become increasingly routine. Maps laid out detailed routes. Books offered guidance on where to find water and grass for cattle, and additional ferries expedited the river crossings. A journey first made almost exclusively by men now included women and children. By 1852, an overland trip that had taken an average of 136 days could be completed in fewer than 90, though many took longer. August was part of a record number of pioneers who crossed the plains in 1852, following the Oregon Trail to one of the branches that headed southwest into California. More than 50,000 people and 100,000 cattle and sheep crossed that summer, according to estimates, most in ordinary farm wagons drawn by oxen. They left behind ruts that lasted into the 21st century. Dysentery and cholera were common, and letter writers told of graves dug before travelers were even dead. They also wrote of the camaraderie. Women took care of other women's children. Men warned other travelers of hostile Indians and dangerous river crossings. Families cared for one another's sick and shared food and water when supplies dwindled. August was vague in his accounts of his first few years in the United States, during which he worked as a hired hand on boats on various rivers and the Great Lakes. But he kept a diary when he joined a party that set out from St. Louis on March 10, 1852. 6'1", blue-eyed, sandy-haired, and strong, he hired on with a captain shepherding a group of 53 pioneers. They traveled up the Missouri River to Jefferson, where the captain stopped to buy 72 oxen and cows he planned to sell in California. Then they headed to St. Joseph, Missouri. Their progress slowed as men on horseback chased after oxen that strayed into nearby forests. A month into the journey, on Easter Monday, they reached St. Joseph, minus 3 cows and 2 oxen. The captain bought 9 more oxen and 8 horses, and collected provisions that had been shipped up the river by steamer, and they set off. After 6 miles, they reached the first mountains, where they stopped for 6 days to rest the cattle, which had walked more than 200 miles. They set out again on April 24th. 9 wagons, 81 oxen, and 18 horses. They traveled between 8 and 12 miles a day, and by the 5th day, water and wood ran short and tempers flared. They stopped cooking with water and rationed it out to drink. 2 months and 300 miles into the trip, they reached Fort Kearny in Nebraska, low on provisions and in revolt against their captain, who had been skimping on food. The officer in charge of Fort Kearny listened to their grievances and their threats to shoot the captain, and told the travelers all he could offer was return passage to St. Joseph. Eager to reach California, the emigrants made peace and pushed on along the well-worn trail. On May 13th, they reached the Platte River, which August described as 3 times wider than the Weser, the river that bordered his Prussian hometown. He marveled at the herds of pronghorn antelope, which he thought at first were a type of deer. They saw occasional herds of buffalo, but the most common animals were wolves, which circled the camp at night and howled. A week later they crossed the Platte by ferry, taking 2 hours to get everyone across. Out of wood to cook by fire, they ate zwieback and ham. On May 26th, they passed what August described as a clod of earth straight up about 300 feet, later known as Chimney Rock. 5 days later, they reached Fort Laramie in the Wyoming Territory, a major trading post in the land of the Sioux. August was intrigued by their customs. "These Indians do not bury their dead," he wrote. "They weave baskets and put their dead into them and stand them in the tops of trees." The travelers forged ahead on the dusty, crowded trail, and on June 8th reached the head of the Platte River in Casper, Wyoming. More than 100 wagons waited to cross, a boon for ferry operators who charged $3 per wagon and $1 per animal. By noon the next day, August's party had safely made it to the other side, swimming the animals to the far shore to save money. Within a week, the party confronted their captain again and threatened to leave him behind. They demanded he provide 2½ pounds of food per day, which would last 40 days, and promised to buy any food needed after. He counteroffered. If they would stretch the food for 6 more days, he promised milk for coffee. 14 men accepted that deal, while the rest insisted on their original terms. On June 18th, they saw snow-covered mountains of the Wind River Range in the distance as they approached a juncture known as the Parting of the Ways. They took the more difficult Sublette Cutoff, which shaved 4 days off the trip, and began a 41-mile trek across a desert described in guidebooks as the Dry Sandy. They traveled mainly at night to avoid the extreme heat. On July 26th, they reached the Big Sandy, also known as the 40-mile desert, a tough stretch in Nevada. They traveled again at night. "Here the measure of water cost $1, August wrote. "Here we lost 7 oxen who died of thirst. We also had to leave a wagon here. Here thousands of cows, horses, mules were lying about dead. The discarded wagons by the hundreds were driven together and burned. Here we saw wagons standing that would never be taken out again, and more than 1,000 guns that had been broken up. Here on this 40 miles are treasures that can never be taken out again. On September 1st, they reached the eastern foothills of the Sierra Nevada and camped for several days before starting the ascent. After 15 days of crossing these mountains, letting our wagons down by rope and tying trees behind the wagon, we came to a little mining town called Hangtown, August wrote. Very bad town, close to where gold was discovered. Here I will go to work for a while. 6 months after leaving St. Louis, the 25-year-old immigrant had reached his new home in California, Hangtown, later renamed Placerville. Practical and frugal, August stayed away from the frenetic, speculative life of the mines. Instead, he found steady work making money off those who came to get rich quick. Hangtown, about 8 miles south of Coloma, where gold had first been discovered, was a hub for the mining community. Within a few weeks, August had a job driving a freight wagon from Coloma to Sutter's Fort, on the outskirts of Sacramento, about 40 miles south. August became friendly with John Sutter and began to venture farther afield. He took supplies by boat from Sacramento up the Feather River to Marysville, a German settlement where Sutter owned a cattle and hog farm. By the spring of 1853, August was still driving a stagecoach and scouting options to settle down and farm. I will go up in this fruitful valley and get myself a large tract of land, he wrote. I have gone up this river, which has been named the Sacramento River, to a little settlement named Colusa. Colusa was a small town in a county of the same name, roughly 60 miles long and 50 miles wide, bordered on the east by the Sacramento River and on the west by the Coast Range. The name came from the local Indian tribe. The mines were on the other side of the river, so Colusa developed slowly. In 1850 there were only 115 residents, but as gold grew scarcer and pioneers became discouraged, they fanned out, settled land, and started businesses. At first the land was used mainly to graze livestock. Then Colusa farmers found they could make more money growing barley and wheat, which they sold as feed for horses that drew the wagons that resupplied the mining camps. By spring 1852, 3 steamboats, the Jenny Lind, Captain Sutter, and Orient, offered regular service up the river from Sacramento, a 90-mile trip that took 18 hours. The river traffic turned Colusa into a boom town, with 2 hotels, a bakery, 3 blacksmith and wagon-making shops, a soda fountain, a vegetable depot, and a doctor. The 1852 census reported a population of 620, 400 white men, 63 white women, 5 Negroes, 3 mulattoes, 66 Indians, and 21 foreign residents. Soon hotels opened along the main routes, providing rest and food for travelers and their horses. There were hotels every few miles, their names reflecting the distance from Colusa. 5-Mile House, 7-Mile House, 9-Mile House, 10-Mile House, 11-Mile House, 16-Mile House, 17-Mile House, 19-Mile House, and 20-Mile House. Wary of the river, which often overflowed and swept away livestock on low-lying ground, August chose his first ranch land carefully and staked his claim. I have taken up land 15 miles west of Colusa, on high land and very fine land near to a large range of mountains called the Coast Range, he wrote in 1854. They are a great range which lies between the Pacific Ocean and the Sacramento Valley. That is what this valley is called now. A remote county with cool winters, blazing hot summers, and lots of rattlesnakes, Colusa was not for everyone. But pioneers drawn to the sparsely settled farmland embraced the quiet provincial lifestyle and put down roots that lasted generations. With little fanfare or effort to lure settlers, the low-key town grew to about 4,500 residents by 1862. Those who came here came.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?